Chapter 5. The Education of Philosopher-Kings and the Role of Women. Such is the good and true city or state, and the good and true person is of the same pattern, and if this is right every other is wrong, and the evil is one which affects not only the ordering of the state, but also the regulation of the individual soul, and is exhibited in 4 forms. What are they? He said. I was proceeding to tell the order in which the 4 evil forms appeared to me to succeed one another, when Polemarch, who was sitting a little way off, just beyond Adimantus, began to whisper to him. Stretching forth his hand, he took hold of the upper part of his coat by the shoulder, and drew him towards him, leaning forward himself so as to be quite close and saying something in his ear, of which I only caught the words, "Shall we let him off, or what shall we do?" "Certainly not," said Adimantus, raising his voice. "Who is it," I said, "whom you are refusing to let off?" "You," he said. I repeated, "Why am I especially not to be let off?" "Why," he said, "we think that you are lazy, and mean to cheat us out of a whole chapter, which is a very important part of the story, and you fancy that we shall not notice your airy way of proceeding, as if it were self-evident to everybody, that in the matter of women and children friends have all things in common." And was I not right, Adimantus? "Yes," he said, "but what is right in this particular case, like everything else, requires to be explained, for community may be of many kinds. Please, therefore, to say what kind of community you mean. We have been long expecting that you would tell us something about the family life of your citizens, how they will bring children into the world, and raise them when they have arrived, and, in general, what is the nature of this community of women and children, for we believe that the right or wrong management of such matters will have a great and paramount influence on the state for good or for evil. And now, since the question is still undetermined, and you are taking on another state, we have resolved, as you heard, not to let you go until you give an account of all this." "To that resolution," said Glaucon, "you may regard me as saying agreed." "And without more ado," said Thrasymachus, "you may consider us all to be equally agreed." I said, "You know not what you are doing in thus attacking me. What an argument are you raising about the state?" Just as I thought that I had finished and was only too glad that I had laid this question to rest and was reflecting how fortunate I was in your acceptance of what I then said, you asked me to begin again at the very foundation, ignorant of what a hornet's nest of words you are stirring. Now I foresaw this gathering trouble and avoided it. "For what purpose do you conceive that we have come here," said Thrasymachus, "to look for gold, or to hear discourse?" "Yes, but discourse should have a limit." "Yes, Socrates," said Glaucon, "and the whole of life is the only limit which wise men assign to the hearing of such discourses. But never mind about us, take heart yourself and answer the question in your own way. What kind of community of women and children is this which is to prevail among our guardians? And how shall we manage the period between birth and education, which seems to require the greatest care? Tell us how these things will be." "Yes, my simple friend, but the answer is the opposite of easy. Many more doubts arise about this than about our previous conclusions. For the practicability of what is said may be doubted, and looked at in another point of view, whether the scheme, if ever so practicable, would be for the best, is also doubtful. Hence, I feel a reluctance to approach the subject, lest our aspiration, my dear friend, should turn out to be a dream only." "Fear not," he replied, "for your audience will not be hard upon you, they are not skeptical or hostile." I said, "My good friend, I suppose that you mean to encourage me by these words." "Yes," he said. "Then let me tell you that you are doing just the opposite. The encouragement which you offer would have been all very well had I myself believed that I knew what I was talking about. To declare the truth about matters of high interest which a man honors and loves among wise men who love him need occasion no fear or faltering in his mind, but to carry on an argument when you are yourself only a hesitating inquirer, which is my condition, is a dangerous and slippery thing, and the danger is not that I shall be laughed at, of which the fear would be childish, but that I shall miss the truth where I have most need to be sure of my footing, and drag my friends after me in my fall. And I pray Nemesis not to visit upon me the words which I am going to utter. For I do indeed believe that to be an involuntary homicide is a less crime than to be a deceiver about beauty or goodness or justice in the matter of laws. And that is a risk which I would rather run among enemies than among friends, and therefore you do well to encourage me. Glaucon laughed and said, Well then, Socrates, in case you and your argument do us any serious injury, you shall be acquitted beforehand of the homicide, and shall not be held to be a deceiver. Take courage, then, and speak. Well, I said, the law says that when a man is acquitted, he is free from guilt, and what holds at law may hold an argument. Then why should you mind? Well, I replied, I suppose that I must retrace my steps and say what I perhaps ought to have said before in the proper place. The part of the men has been played out, and now properly enough comes the turn of the women. Of them I will proceed to speak, and the more readily, since I am invited by you. For men born and educated like our citizens, the only way, in my opinion, of arriving at a right conclusion about the possession and use of women and children is to follow the path on which we originally started, when we said that the men were to be the guardians and watchdogs of the herd. True. Let us further suppose the birth and education of our women to be subject to similar or nearly similar regulations, then we shall see whether the result accords with our design. What do you mean? What I mean may be put into the form of a question, I said. Are dogs divided into males and females, or do they both share equally in hunting and in keeping watch and in the other duties of dogs? Or do we entrust to the males the entire and exclusive care of the flocks, while we leave the females at home, under the idea that the bearing and suckling their puppies is labor enough for them? No, he said, they share alike. The only difference between them is that the males are stronger and the females weaker. But can you use different animals for the same purpose unless they are bred and fed in the same way? You cannot. Then, if women are to have the same responsibilities as men, they must have the same nurture and education? Yes. The education which was assigned to the men was music and physical education. Yes. Then women must be taught music and physical education and the art of war, which they must practice like the men. That is the inference, I suppose. I should rather expect, I said, that several of our proposals, if they are carried out, being unusual, may appear ridiculous. No doubt of it. Yes, and the most ridiculous thing of all will be the sight of women naked in the gymnasium, exercising with the men, especially when they are no longer young. They certainly will not be a vision of beauty, any more than the enthusiastic old men who despite wrinkles and ugliness continue to frequent the gymnasiums. Yes, indeed, he said. According to present notions, the proposal would be thought ridiculous. But then, I said, as we have determined to speak our minds, we must not fear the jests of the wits which will be directed against this sort of innovation. How they will talk of women's accomplishments, both in music and physical education, and above all about their wearing armor and riding upon horseback. Very true, he replied. Yet having begun, we must go forward to the challenging aspects of the law, at the same time begging of these gentlemen, for once in their life, to be serious. Not long ago, as we shall remind them, the Greeks were of the opinion, which is still generally received among the barbarians, that the sight of a naked man was ridiculous and improper. And when first the Cretans and then the Spartans introduced the custom, the wits of that day might equally have ridiculed the innovation. No doubt. But when experience showed that to let all things be uncovered was far better than to cover them up, and the ludicrous effect to the outward eye vanished before the better principle which reason asserted, then the man was perceived to be a fool who directs the shafts of his ridicule at any other sight but that of folly and vice, or seriously inclines to weigh the beautiful by any other standard but that of the good. Very true, he replied. First, then, whether the question is to be put in jest or in earnest, let us come to an understanding about the nature of woman. Is she capable of sharing either wholly or partially in the actions of men, or not at all? And is the art of war one of those arts in which she can or cannot share? That will be the best way of commencing the inquiry, and will probably lead to the fairest conclusion. That will be much the best way. Shall we take the other side first and begin by arguing against ourselves? In this manner the adversary's position will not be undefended. Why not, he said. Then let us put a speech into the mouths of our opponents. They will say, Socrates and Glaucon, no adversary need convict you, for you yourselves, at the first foundation of the state, admitted the principle that everybody was to do the one work suited to his own nature. And certainly, if I am not mistaken, such an admission was made by us. And do not the natures of men and women differ very much indeed? And we shall reply, of course, they do. Then we shall be asked, whether the tasks assigned to men and to women should not be different, and such as are agreeable to their different natures? Certainly, they should. But if so, have you not fallen into a serious inconsistency in saying that men and women, whose natures are so entirely different, ought to perform the same actions? What defense will you make for us, my good sir, against anyone who offers these objections? That is not an easy question to answer when asked suddenly, and I do beg you to draw out the case on our side. These are the objections, Glaucon, and there are many others of a like kind, which I foresaw long ago. They made me afraid and reluctant to take in hand any law about the possession and nurture of women and children. By Zeus, he said, the problem to be solved is anything but easy. Why yes, I said, but the fact is that when a man is out of his depth, whether he has fallen into a little swimming bath or into mid-ocean, he must swim all the same. Very true. And must not we swim and try to reach the shore? We will hope that Arion's dolphin or some other miraculous help may save us? I suppose so, he said. Well then, let us see if any way of escape can be found. We acknowledged, did we not, that different natures ought to have different pursuits, and that men's and women's natures are different. And now what are we saying? That different natures ought to have the same pursuits. This is the inconsistency which is charged upon us. Precisely. Verily, Glaucon, I said, glorious is the power of the art of contradiction. Why do you say so? Because I think that many a man falls into the practice against his will. When he thinks that he is reasoning, he is really disputing, just because he cannot define and divide, and so know that of which he is speaking, and he will pursue a merely verbal opposition in the spirit of contention and not of fair discussion. Yes, he replied, such is very often the case, but what has that to do with us and our argument? A great deal, for there is certainly a danger of our getting unintentionally into a verbal opposition. In what way? Why, we valiantly and pugnaciously insist upon the verbal truth, that different natures ought to have different pursuits, but we never considered at all what was the meaning of sameness or difference of nature, or why we distinguished them when we assigned different pursuits to different natures and the same to the same natures. Why, no, he said, that was never considered by us. I said, suppose that by way of illustration we were to ask the question whether there is not an opposition in nature between bald men and hairy men, and if this is admitted by us, then, if bald men are cobblers, we should forbid the hairy men to be cobblers, and conversely? That would be a joke, he said. Yes, I said, a joke, and why? Because we never meant when we constructed the state that the opposition of natures should extend to every difference, but only to those differences which affected the pursuit in which the individual is engaged. We should have argued, for example, that a physician and one who is in mind a physician may be said to have the same nature. True. The physician and the carpenter have different natures, don't they? Certainly. And if, I said, the male and female sex appear to differ in their fitness for any art or pursuit, we should say that such pursuit or art ought to be assigned to one or the other of them, but if the difference consists only in women bearing and men begetting children, this does not prove that a woman differs from a man in terms of the education she should receive, and we shall therefore continue to maintain that our guardians and their wives ought to have the same pursuits. Very true, he said. Next, we shall ask our opponent how, in reference to any of the pursuits or arts of civic life, the nature of a woman differs from that of a man. That will be quite fair. And perhaps he, like yourself, will reply that to give a sufficient answer on the spot is not easy, but after a little reflection, there is no difficulty. Yes, perhaps. Suppose then that we invite him to accompany us in the argument, And then we may hope to show him that there is nothing peculiar in the constitution of women which would affect them in the administration of the state. By all means. Let us say to him, "Come now, and we will ask you a question. When you spoke of a nature gifted or not gifted in any respect, did you mean to say that one man will acquire a thing easily, another with difficulty, a little learning will lead the one to discover a great deal, whereas the other, after much study and application, no sooner learns than he forgets? Or again, did you mean that the one has a body which is a good servant to his mind, while the body of the other is a hindrance to him? Would not these be the sort of differences which distinguish the man gifted by nature from the one who is ungifted? No one will deny that. And can you mention any pursuit of mankind in which the male sex does not possess all these gifts and qualities in a higher degree than the female? Need I waste time in speaking of the art of weaving, and the management of pancakes and preserves, in which womankind does really appear to be great, and in which for her to be beaten by a man is of all things the most absurd? You are quite right, he replied, in maintaining the general inferiority of the female sex. Although many women are in many things superior to many men, yet on the whole what you say is true. And if so, my friend, I said, there is no special faculty of administration in a state which a woman has because she is a woman, or which a man has by virtue of his sex, but the gifts of nature are alike diffused in both. All the pursuits of men are the pursuits of women also, but in all of them a woman is inferior to a man. Very true. Then are we to impose all our enactments on men and none of them on women? That will never do. One woman has a gift of healing, another not. One is a musician, and another has no music in her nature. Very true. And one woman has a turn for gymnastic and military exercises, and another is unwarlike and hates gymnastics? Certainly. And one woman is a philosopher, and another is an enemy of philosophy. One has spirit, and another is without spirit? That is also true. Then one woman will have the temper of a guardian, and another not. Was not the selection of the male guardians determined by differences of this sort? Yes. Men and women alike possess the qualities which make a guardian, they differ only in their comparative strength or weakness. Obviously, those women who possess such qualities should be chosen as companions and colleagues for men who have similar qualities. It is only natural for individuals with the same nature to pursue the same interests. Therefore, it is not unnatural to assign music and gymnastics to the wives of the guardians. The law that we enacted before was in accordance with nature and not merely an aspiration. The current practice, which goes against this law, is a violation of nature. We had to consider the possibility and the benefits of our proposals. The possibility has been acknowledged, and now we must establish the great benefits. The same education that makes a man a good guardian will also make a woman a good guardian because their original nature is the same. Not all men are equal in excellence, and the guardians brought up on our model system are more perfect than the cobblers. Therefore, our guardians are the best citizens, and their spouses are the best women. It is in the best interest of the state for its men and women to be as good as possible, and the arts of music and exercise, as described, will accomplish this. We have made a law that is not only possible, but highly beneficial to the state. Therefore, let the spouses of our guardians participate in the toils of war and the defense of their country. The lighter tasks can be assigned to women, who are the weaker natures, but their duties should be the same in all other respects. Anyone who laughs at naked women exercising their bodies for noble reasons is ignorant and does not understand the value of the useful and the harmful. This resolves one difficulty in our law about women. However, a greater difficulty is coming. The law states that the spouses and children of our guardians are to be common, and no parent should know their own child, nor any child their parent. The utility of this law is unquestionable, but its possibility will be disputed. I believe there can be doubts raised about both the utility and possibility. You suggest that the two questions must be combined. I meant for you to admit the utility first, so we could focus on the possibility. But since that attempt failed, I will defend both. grant me a favor and allow me to indulge in a daydream. Let me assume that what I desire is already granted and proceed with my plan. I will not concern myself with the possibility for now. Assuming the possibility, I will now discuss how the rulers will implement these arrangements and demonstrate the benefits to the state and the guardians. Firstly, for our rulers and their auxiliaries to be worthy of their names, there must be a willingness to obey and the power to command. The guardians must obey the laws and embody their spirit in any details entrusted to them. That is right, he said. You, I said, who are their legislator, having selected the men, will now select the women and give them to them. They must be as far as possible of like natures with them, and they must live in common houses and meet at common meals. None of them will have anything specially his or her own. They will be together, and will be brought up together, and will associate at exercise. And so, they will be drawn by a necessity of their natures to have intercourse with each other. Necessity is not too strong a word, I think. Yes, he said, necessity, not geometrical, but another sort of necessity which lovers know, and which is far more convincing and constraining to the mass of mankind. True, I said, and this, Glaucon, like all the rest, must proceed after an orderly fashion. In a city of the blessed, licentiousness is an unholy thing which the rulers will forbid. Yes, he said, and it ought not to be permitted. Then clearly the next thing will be to make matrimony sacred in the highest degree, and what is most beneficial will be deemed sacred. Exactly. And how can marriages be made most beneficial? That is a question which I put to you, because I see in your house dogs for hunting, and of the nobler sort of birds not a few. Now, I ask you, please tell me, have you ever attended to their pairing and breeding? In what specifics? Why, first of all, although they are all of a good sort, are not some better than others? True. And do you breed from them all equally, or do you take care to breed from the best only? From the best. And do you take the oldest or the youngest, or only those of mature age? I choose only those of mature age. And if we do not take care in breeding, our dogs and birds will greatly deteriorate, right? Yes, that is correct. The same goes for horses and animals in general, doesn't it? Absolutely. Goodness. My dear friend, what exceptional skill will our rulers need if the same principle applies to the human species? Indeed, the same principle applies, but why would this require any particular skill? Because, you see, our rulers will often have to work on the collective body with remedies. Now, you know that when patients only need to follow a regimen and do not require remedies, the inferior sort of practitioner is considered good enough. But when medicine needs to be given, then the doctor should be more skilled. That is true, but what are you referring to? What I mean is that our rulers will find a considerable amount of falsehood and deceit necessary for the good of their subjects. We were saying that the use of all these things considered as remedies might be beneficial. And we were absolutely right. And this lawful use of them seems likely to be often needed in the regulations of marriages and births. How so? Well, you see, the principle has already been established that the best individuals of either sex should be united with the best as often as possible, and the inferior with the inferior as seldom as possible. And they should raise the offspring of the superior union, but not of the inferior one, if the population is to be maintained in top condition. Now, these actions must be kept a secret that only the rulers know, or there will be a further danger of our herd, as we may call the guardians, rebelling. That is very true. Shouldn't we establish certain celebrations where we bring together the brides and grooms, offer sacrifices, and have suitable wedding songs composed by our poets? The number of weddings should be left to the discretion of the rulers, whose aim will be to maintain the average population. There are many other things they will have to consider, such as the effects of wars, diseases, and any similar influences, in order to prevent the state from becoming either too large or too small. Certainly, that makes sense. We will have to invent some clever kind of lots that the less worthy individuals may draw on each occasion of bringing them together, so they will blame their own bad luck and not the rulers. To be sure. And I think that our braver and better youth, besides their other honors and rewards, should have greater opportunities to interact with women given to them. Their bravery will be a reason, and such fathers ought to have as many sons as possible. True. And the proper officers, whether male or female or both, for offices are to be held by women as well as men. Yes. The proper officers will take the offspring of the good parents to a pen or fold, and there they will place them with certain nurses who dwell in a separate area. But the offspring of the inferior or deformed individuals, even if they are better, will be put away in some mysterious, unknown place, as they should be. Yes, that must be done if the breed of the guardians is to be kept pure. They will provide for their nurture and bring the mothers to the fold when they are full of milk, taking the greatest possible care that no mother recognizes her own child. And other wet nurses may be engaged if more are required. Care will also be taken to ensure that the process of suckling is not prolonged too long. The mothers will have no getting up at night or any other trouble. All of that will be handled by the nurses and attendants. You suppose the wives of our guardians to have an easy time of it when they are having children? Well, yes, they ought to. But let us continue with our plan. We were saying that the parents should be in the prime of life, right? Yes, that is true. And what is the prime of life? Can it not be defined as a period of about 20 years in a woman's life and 30 in a man? Which years do you mean to include? A woman, I would say, at 20 years of age, may begin to bear children for the state and continue to bear them until 40. A man may begin at 25 when he has passed the point at which the pulse of life beats the quickest and continue to beget children until he is 55. Certainly, those years are the prime of physical as well as intellectual vigor in both men and women. Anyone above or below the prescribed ages who takes part in the public weddings shall be said to have done an unholy and unrighteous thing. The child, if it comes into existence, will have been conceived under circumstances very unlike the sacrifices and prayers that the priestesses, priests, and the whole city will offer at each wedding, praying that the new generation may be better and more useful than their good and useful parents. Whereas his child will be the offspring of darkness and strange lust. The same law will apply to anyone within the specified age who forms a connection with any woman in the prime of life without the approval of the rulers. We shall say that he is raising up an illegitimate child to the state, uncertified and unconsecrated. This applies, however, only to those who are within the specified age. After that, we allow them to engage in relationships at will, except that a man may not marry his daughter or his daughter's daughter, or his mother or his mother's mother. Women, on the other hand, are prohibited from marrying their sons or fathers, or son's son or father's father, and so on in either direction. And we agree to all of this, giving permission with strict orders to prevent any potential offspring from being born and seeing the light of day. And if any do manage to be born, the parents must understand that the children from such unions cannot be supported, and they must decide accordingly. That is also a reasonable proposition, he said. But how will they know who are the fathers and daughters, and so on? They will never know. The way it will work is this: starting from the day of the wedding, the groom who is married will consider all the male children born in the 7th and 10th month after the wedding as his sons, and the female children as his daughters. They will call him father, and he will call their children his grandchildren. The older generation will be called grandfathers and grandmothers. All those who were conceived when their fathers and mothers came together will be considered their brothers and sisters, and, as I was saying, they will be forbidden to marry each other. However, this is not an absolute prohibition. If they are favored by the gods and receive the approval of the Pythian oracle, they will be allowed to marry. Quite right, he replied. This is the plan, Glaucon, according to which the guardians of our state will have their spouses and families in common. And now you want the argument to show that this community is consistent with the rest of our society, and that nothing can be better, correct? Yes, certainly. Shall we try to find a common basis by asking ourselves what the main goal of the legislator should be in making laws and organizing a state? What is the greatest good and what is the greatest evil? And then we can consider whether our previous description aligns with the good or the evil. By all means. Can there be any greater evil than discord and division where there should be unity? Or any greater good than the bond of unity? There cannot. And there is unity when there is a shared experience of pleasure and pain when all the citizens are happy or sad on the same occasions of joy and sorrow? No doubt. Yes, and when there is no shared feeling but only individual feelings, a state is in disarray when you have one half of the world celebrating while the other half is grieving over the same events happening to the city or its citizens. Certainly. Such differences usually arise from disagreements about the use of the terms mine and not mine, his and not his. Exactly. And isn't the best ordered state the one in which the greatest number of people use the terms mine and not mine in the same way for the same things? Quite true. Or the one that most closely resembles the condition of an individual, like in the body, when one of our fingers is hurt, the whole body, drawn towards the soul as a center and forming one kingdom under its ruling power, feels the pain and sympathizes with the affected part. We say that the person has a pain in their finger, and the same expression is used for any other part of the body that experiences pain or pleasure. Very true, he replied. And I agree with you that the best ordered state comes closest to this shared feeling that you described. So, when any of the citizens experiences something good or bad, the whole state will make it their own, and they will either rejoice or grieve with that person? Yes, that is what will happen in a well-ordered state. Now it is time, I said, for us to return to our state and see whether this form or some other form is most in accordance with these fundamental principles. Very good. Our state, like any other, has rulers and subjects, right? True. And they will all call each other citizens? Of course. But isn't there another name that people give to their rulers in other states? Usually, they call them masters, but in democratic states, they simply call them rulers. And in our state, besides citizens, what other name do people give to the rulers? They are called saviors and helpers, he replied. And what do the rulers call the people? Their maintainers and foster fathers. And what do they call them in other states? Slaves. And what do the rulers call each other in other states? Fellow rulers. And what about us, fellow guardians? Have you ever seen an example in any other state of a ruler who would consider one of his colleagues as his friend and another as not his friend? Yes, very often. And the friend he regards and describes as someone he has an interest in, while the other is seen as a stranger in whom he has no interest. Exactly. But would any of your guardians think or speak of any other guardian as a stranger? Certainly not, for everyone they meet will be regarded by them as either a brother or sister, or father or mother, or son or daughter, or as the child or parent of those who are connected to them in this way. Excellent, I said. But let me ask you again, will they be a family in name only, or will they truly act as a family in all their actions? For example, when they use the word father, will they imply the care of a father and the filial reverence and duty and obedience that the law commands? And will the violator of these duties be seen as an impious and unrighteous person who is unlikely to receive much good from God or man? Will these be the principles that the children will hear repeated by all the citizens about those who are indicated to them as their parents and the rest of their relatives? Yes, he said, and none other. For what could be more ridiculous than to utter the names of family ties with the lips only and not act accordingly? Then, in our city, the language of harmony and concord will be heard more often than in any other. As I was explaining earlier, when someone is well or ill, the common phrase will be with me, it is well or it is ill. That is very true. And according to this way of thinking and speaking, weren't we saying that they will have their pleasures and pains in common? Yes, that is correct. And they will have a shared interest in the same things, which they will all call my own, and with this shared interest, they will have a common feeling of pleasure and pain? Yes, even more so than in other states. And the reason for this, in addition to the overall structure of the state, is that the guardians will have a community of women and children? That will be the main reason. And this unity of feeling that we acknowledge to be the greatest good, as we compared a well-ordered state to the relationship between the body and its members, when affected by pleasure or pain? Yes, we acknowledge that, and rightly so. So, the community of wives and children among our citizens is clearly the source of the greatest good for the state? Certainly. And this aligns with the other principle we were affirming, that the guardians were not to have houses or lands or any other property, their pay was to be their food, which they were to receive from the other citizens, and they were not to have any personal expenses, because we intended for them to maintain their true character as guardians. Right, he replied. Both the community of property and the community of families, as I am saying, contribute to making them more true guardians. They will not tear the city apart by arguing over mine and not mine, each person bringing any acquisition they have made into a separate house of their own, where they have a separate spouse and children and personal pleasures and pains, but all will be affected as much as possible by the same pleasures and pains because they all share the same opinions about what is near and dear to them, and therefore they all strive towards a common goal. Certainly, he replied. And since they have nothing but their own bodies, suits and complaints will not exist among them, they will be free from all those quarrels that money or children or relatives cause. Of course, they will. Neither will there be any trials for assault or insult among them. For we shall maintain that equals should defend themselves against equals, which is honorable and right. We shall make the protection of the person a matter of necessity. That is good, he said. Yes, and there is another benefit in the law, namely, that if a person has a quarrel with another, they will satisfy their resentment then and there, and not escalate to more dangerous actions. Certainly. The duty of ruling and chastising the younger shall be assigned to the elder. Clearly. And there is no doubt that the younger will not strike or commit any other violence against an elder, unless commanded by the magistrates, nor will they disrespect them in any way. For there are two guardians, shame and fear, powerful enough to prevent them, shame, which makes people refrain from laying hands on those who are in the position of parents to them, fear, that the injured one will be helped by others who are their brothers, sons, fathers. That is true, he replied. So, in every way, the laws will help the citizens maintain peace with one another? Yes, there will be no lack of peace. And since the guardians will never quarrel among themselves, there will be no danger of the rest of the city being divided either against them or against each other. None. I hardly even want to mention the petty vices from which they will be free, as they are beneath notice, such as the flattery of the rich by the poor, and all the pains and struggles that people experience in raising a family, and in finding money to buy necessities for their household, borrowing and then repudiating, getting by however they can, and giving the money into the hands of women and slaves to manage. These many evils of various kinds that people suffer in this way are mean and obvious, and not worth mentioning. Yes, he said, a person doesn't need eyes to perceive that. And they will be delivered from all these evils, and their lives will be blessed like the lives of Olympic victors, and even more blessed. How so? The Olympic victor, I said, is considered happy in receiving only a part of the blessedness that is secured to our citizens, who have achieved a more glorious victory and have a more complete provision at the expense of the public. For the victory they have achieved is the salvation of the whole nation, and the crown with which they and their children are crowned is the abundance of everything that life needs. They receive rewards from their country while alive, and after death, they have an honorable burial. Yes, he said, and those rewards are glorious. Do you remember, I said, how during the previous discussion someone accused us of making our guardians unhappy? They had nothing and could have had everything, to whom we replied that, if the opportunity arose, we might consider this question in the future, but for now, we were making our guardians truly guardians, and we were shaping the nation with the aim of the greatest happiness, not of any particular class, but of the whole? Yes, I remember. And what do you say now that the life of our protectors is shown to be far better and nobler than that of Olympic victors? Is the life of shoemakers, or any other artisans, or of farmers, to be compared to it? Certainly not. At the same time, I should repeat what I have said elsewhere, that if any of our guardians try to find personal happiness in a way that causes them to cease being guardians, and if they are not content with the safe and harmonious life that we believe is the best life of all, but instead become infatuated with some youthful idea of happiness that clouds their judgment and they seek to take control of the entire state for themselves, then they need to understand the wisdom in Hesiod's words. Half is more than the whole. If they were to ask for my advice, I would tell them to stay where they are, when they have the opportunity for such a life. So, you agree then, that men and women should have a common way of life as we have described shared education, shared children. They should watch over the citizens together, whether they are in the city or out at war. They should keep watch and hunt together, like dogs. And in all things, to the best of their abilities, women should share with men. By doing so, they will do what is best and will not violate, but preserve, the natural relationship between the sexes. I agree with you, he replied. Now, we must investigate whether such a community is possible among animals and also among humans. And if it is possible, how can it be achieved? You have already anticipated the question I was going to ask. There is no difficulty, I said, in seeing how they will conduct war. How? Well, of course, they will go on expeditions together, taking any of their children who are strong enough so that, like an artisan's child, they can observe the work they will have to do when they grow up. In addition to observing, they will also have to assist and be useful in war and attend to their fathers and mothers. Have you not noticed how the children of potters watch and help long before they start working on the wheel? Yes, I have. And should potters be more diligent in educating their children and giving them the opportunity to observe and practice their duties than our guardians? That idea is ridiculous, he said. Furthermore, the presence of their young ones will be the greatest motivation for valor in the parents, just as it is with other animals. That is absolutely true, Socrates. However, if they are defeated, which may often happen in war, there is great danger. The children will be lost along with their parents, and the nation will never recover. That is true, I said. But would you never allow them to take any risks? I am not saying that. Well, if they are ever going to take risks, should it not be on occasions when, if they escape disaster, they will be better off for it? Clearly. Whether the future soldiers see war during their youth or not is a very important matter. For the sake of this, some risk may be justified. Yes, it is very important. Therefore, our first step must be to make our children witnesses of war. However, we must also ensure that they are protected from danger. Then everything will be fine. True. We can assume that the parents are not blind to the risks of war, but rather, they know, to the best of human foresight, which expeditions are safe, and which are dangerous. That can be assumed. And they will take them on the safe expeditions and be cautious about the dangerous ones? That's right. And they will place them under the command of experienced veterans who will be their leaders and teachers? Absolutely. However, the dangers of war cannot always be foreseen. There is a significant element of chance involved. That is true. So, in case of such unforeseen dangers, the children must be equipped with wings so that they can fly away and escape when needed. What do you mean? He said. I mean that we must put them on horses from a young age, and when they have learned to ride, take them on horseback to witness war. The horses should not be spirited and warlike, but rather the most obedient and yet the fastest that can be found. This way, they will have an excellent view of what will eventually become their own business. And if there is danger, they only need to follow their elder leaders and escape. I believe you are right, he said. Now, let's discuss the relations between your soldiers and each other, as well as their enemies. I would propose that any soldier who abandons their position, discards their weapons, or commits any other act of cowardice should be demoted to the rank of a farmer or artisan. What do you think? I would say. And the soldier who allows themselves to be captured might as well be given as a gift to their enemies. They are the enemy's rightful prey, and the enemies can do as they please with them. Certainly. But what about the hero who has distinguished themselves? What should be done for them? First and foremost, they should receive honor from their young comrades in the army. Each one of them, in turn, should crown the hero. What do you say? I agree. And what about them receiving the support and friendship of their comrades? I agree to that as well. But you may not agree with my next suggestion. What is your suggestion? That they should embrace and be embraced by their comrades. Most certainly, and I would even go further and say, let anyone whom they wish to embrace not refuse their embrace for the duration of the expedition. So, if there is a lover in the army, whether his love is for a young man or a young woman, he may be more eager to win the prize of bravery. Excellent, I said. That the brave man should have more spouses than others have already been decided, and he should have first choice in such matters more than others, so that he may have as many children as possible? Agreed. Again, there is another way in which, according to Homer, brave youths should be honored, for he tells how Ajax, after he had distinguished himself in battle, was rewarded with large portions of meat, which seems to be a compliment appropriate to a hero in the prime of his life, being not only a tribute of honor but also a very fortifying thing. Most true, he said. Then in this, I said, Homer shall be our teacher, and we too, at religious ceremonies and on similar occasions, will honor the brave according to the measure of their bravery, whether men or women, with songs and other distinctions that we were mentioning, also with seats of honor, and food and full cups, and in honoring them, we will also be training them. That, he replied, is excellent. Yes, I said. And when a man dies gloriously in war, shall we not say, in the first place, that he is of the noble race? To be sure. Nay, do we not have the authority of Hesiod for affirming that when they are dead, they are holy messengers upon the earth, doers of good, warders off of evil, the guardians of speech-gifted men? Yes, and we accept his authority. We must learn from the god how we are to arrange the burial of divine and heroic individuals, and what their special distinction is to be, and we must do as he commands? By all means. And in future ages, we will honor them and kneel before their tombs as at the graves of heroes. And not only them, but any who are deemed exceptionally good, whether they die from old age, or in any other way, shall be admitted to the same honors. That is very right, he said. Next, how should our soldiers treat their enemies? What about this? In what way do you mean? First of all, in regard to slavery? Do you think it right that Greeks should enslave Greek states, or allow others to enslave them, if they can prevent it? Should not their custom be to spare them, considering the danger that the entire race may one day fall under the control of the barbarians? To spare them is infinitely better. Then no Greek should be owned by them as a slave. That is a rule which they will follow and advise the other Greeks to follow. Certainly, he said, they will in this way be united against the barbarians, and will keep their hands off one another. Next, what about the dead? Should the victors, I said, take anything other than their weapons? Does not the practice of looting an enemy provide an excuse for not facing the battle? Cowards lurk around the dead, pretending that they are performing a duty, and many an army has been defeated because of this love of plunder. Very true. And is it not ungenerous and greedy to rob a dead body, and also a degree of pettiness and cowardice to make an enemy of the lifeless body when the real enemy has fled and left only his weapons behind? Is this not similar to a dog who cannot reach his attacker, quarreling with the stones that hit him instead? Very much like a dog, he said. Then we must refrain from plundering the dead or obstructing their burial. Yes, he replied, we certainly must. Neither shall we offer up weapons at the temples of the gods, especially not the weapons of Greeks, if we want to maintain good relations with other Greeks, and, indeed, we have reason to fear that offering spoils taken from our kin may be a sacrilege unless commanded by the god himself? Very true. Again, as for the destruction of Greek territory or the burning of houses, what should be the practice? May I have the pleasure, he said, of hearing your opinion? Both should be forbidden. In my opinion, I would take only the annual harvest and nothing more. Shall I tell you why? Please do. Well, you see, there is a difference in the words discord and war, and I believe that there is also a difference in their natures. The first one is indicative of what is internal and domestic, the second one of what is external and foreign, and the first of the two is called discord, and only the second one, war. That is a very appropriate distinction, he replied. And may I not observe with equal appropriateness that the Greek race is all united together by ties of blood and friendship, and foreign and strange to the barbarians? Very good, he said. And therefore, when Greeks fight with foreigners and foreigners with Greeks, they will be described by us as being at war when they fight, and by nature enemies, and this kind of antagonism should be called war. But when Greeks fight with one another we shall say that Greece is then in a state of disorder and discord, they being by nature friends, and such enmity is to be called discord. I agree. Consider then, I said, when that which we have acknowledged to be discord occurs, and a city is divided, if both parties destroy the lands and burn the houses of one another, how wicked does the strife appear? No true lover of his country would bring himself to tear in pieces his own nurse and mother. There might be reason in the conqueror depriving the conquered of their harvest, but still, they would have the idea of peace in their hearts and would not mean to go on fighting forever. Yes, he said, that is a better temperament than the other. And will not the city, which you are founding, be a Greek city? It ought to be, he replied. Then will not the citizens be good and civilized? Yes, very civilized. And will they not be lovers of Greece, and think of Greece as their own land, and share in the common temples? Most certainly. And any difference which arises among them will be regarded by them as discord only, a quarrel among friends, which is not to be called a war? Certainly not. Then they will quarrel as those who intend someday to be reconciled? Certainly. They will use friendly correction, but will not enslave or destroy their opponents. They will be correctors, not enemies? Just so. And as they are Greeks themselves, they will not devastate Greece, nor will they burn houses, nor ever suppose that the whole population of a city, men, women, and children, are equally their enemies, for they know that the guilt of war is always confined to a few persons, and that the many are their friends. And for all these reasons, they will be unwilling to waste their lands and raise their houses. Their enmity to them will only last until the many innocent sufferers have compelled the guilty few to give satisfaction? I agree, he said, that our citizens should thus deal with their Greek enemies, and with foreigners as the Greeks now deal with one another. Then let us enact this law also for our guardians, that they are neither to devastate the lands of Greeks nor to burn their houses. Agreed, and we may agree also in thinking that these, like all our previous enactments, are very good. But still I must say, Socrates, that if you are allowed to go on in this way you will entirely forget the other question which at the commencement of this discussion you thrust aside. Is such an order of things possible, and how, if at all? For I am quite ready to acknowledge that the plan which you propose, if only feasible, would do all sorts of good to the state. I will add, what you have omitted, that your citizens will be the bravest of warriors, and will never leave their ranks, for they will all know one another, and each will call the other father, brother, son, and if you suppose the women to join their armies, whether in the same rank or in the rear, either as a terror to the enemy, or as auxiliaries in case of need, I know that they will then be absolutely invincible, and there are many domestic advantages which might also be mentioned and which I also fully acknowledge. But, as I admit all these advantages and as many more as you please, if only this state of yours were to come into existence, we need say no more about them. Assuming then the existence of the state, let us now turn to the question of possibility and ways and means. The rest may be left. If I loiter for a moment, you instantly make a raid upon me, I said, and have no mercy. I have hardly escaped the first and second waves, and you seem not to be aware that you are now bringing upon me the third, which is the greatest and heaviest. When you have seen and heard the third wave, I think you will be more considerate and will acknowledge that some fear and hesitation was natural respecting a proposal so extraordinary as that which I have now to state and investigate. The more appeals of this sort which you make, he said, the more determined are we that you shall tell us how such a state is possible. Speak out and at once. Let me begin by reminding you that we found our way hither in the search after justice and injustice. True, he replied, but what about that? I was only going to ask whether, if we have discovered them, we are to require that the just man should in nothing fail of absolute justice, or may we be satisfied with an approximation, and the attainment in him of a higher degree of justice than is to be found in other men? The approximation will be enough. We were inquiring into the nature of absolute justice and into the character of the perfectly just, and into injustice and the perfectly unjust, that we might have an ideal. We were to look at these in order that we might judge of our own happiness and unhappiness according to the standard which they exhibited and the degree in which we resembled them, but not with any view of showing that they could exist in fact. True, he said. Would a painter be any the worse because, after having delineated with consummate art an ideal of a perfectly beautiful man, he was unable to show that any such man could ever have existed? He would be none the worse. Well, and were we not creating an ideal of a perfect state? To be sure. And is our theory a worse theory because we are unable to prove the possibility of a city being ordered in the manner described? Surely not, he replied. That is the truth, I said. But if, at your request, I am to try and show how and under what conditions the possibility is highest, I must ask you, having this in view, to repeat your former admissions. What admissions? I want to know whether ideals are ever fully realized in language. Does not the word express more than the fact, and must not the actual, whatever a man may think, always, in things, fall short of the truth? What do you say? I agree. Then you must not insist on my proving that the actual state will in every respect coincide with the ideal. If we are only able to discover how a city may be governed nearly as we proposed, you will admit that we have discovered the possibility which you demand, and will be contented. I am sure that I should be content, will not you? Yes, I will. Let me next try to explain what is wrong with the government and what is the smallest change that can lead to a better form of government. Ideally, the change should be in only one thing, or if not, in two. In any case, the changes should be as few and minor as possible. Certainly, he replied. I think, I said, that there might be a reform of the government if only one change were made, which is not a small or easy change, but still possible. What is it? He said. Now then, I said, I am going to tackle what I consider to be the biggest challenge. Even though it might seem ridiculous, I will still say it, even if it makes me the target of laughter and ridicule. Pay attention to my words. Go ahead. I said, until philosophers become kings, or the kings and rulers of this world embrace the spirit and power of philosophy, and political greatness and wisdom come together, and those who only pursue one or the other are forced to step aside, cities will never find peace from their problems, nor will humanity, in my opinion, and only then will our state have a chance at life and see the light of day. That was the thought, my dear Glaucon, that I wanted to express, even though it seemed too extreme, because it is indeed difficult to believe that there can be no happiness, either private or public, in any other form of government. Socrates, what do you mean? I want you to understand that the idea you just expressed is one that many people, and respectable people at that, will vehemently oppose. They will come at you with force and aggression, ready to attack you in any way possible. If you don't have a response and act, they will overpower you with their intelligence. You got me into this mess, I said. And I was right. However, I will do everything I can to help you out of it. But all I can offer is goodwill and advice, and perhaps I can provide better answers to your questions than others, that's all. And now, with such assistance, you must do your best to convince the skeptics that you are right. I should try, I said, since you are offering me such valuable assistance. And I believe that, if we want a chance to escape, we must explain to them who we mean when we say that philosophers should rule the government. Then we will be able to defend ourselves. There will be some individuals who are meant to study philosophy and be leaders in the government, and others who are not meant to be philosophers, but rather followers. Now, let's come up with a definition, he said. Follow me, I said, and I hope that I can somehow give you a satisfactory explanation. Go ahead. I'm sure you remember, so I don't need to remind you, that a lover, if he is truly a lover, should not just love one part of the person he loves, but the whole. I really don't understand, so I ask for your help in refreshing my memory. Another person, I said, might respond as you did, but a pleasure seeker like yourself should know that anyone in their prime somehow stirs up emotions in a lover's heart and is considered worthy of their affection. Isn't this how you are with beautiful people? One person has a snub nose, and you praise their charming face, another has a hooked nose, and you say it has a regal look, and the person with a normal nose is praised for their regularity. The dark-skinned are seen as manly, while the fair-skinned are considered children of the gods. And as for those who are called honey pale, isn't that just a term invented by a lover who speaks in diminutives and doesn't mind the paleness on the cheeks of youth? In other words, there is no excuse you wouldn't make and nothing you wouldn't say to not miss out on any beautiful person in their youth. If you make me an authority in matters of love, for the sake of this argument, I agree. And what do you say about wine lovers? Don't you see them doing the same? They are happy to find any excuse to drink any wine. Very well. And the same goes for ambitious people. If they can't command an army, they are satisfied with commanding a small group. And if they can't be honored by important people, they are happy to be honored by lesser individuals, though they must have some form of honor. Exactly. Let me ask you once more, does someone who desires a certain type of goods desire the whole category or just a part? The whole. And can't we say the same about philosophers? They love not just a part of wisdom, but the whole of it. Yes, the whole. And someone who dislikes learning, especially in their youth when they can't judge what is good and what is not, we can say that they are not a philosopher or a lover of knowledge, just as someone who refuses to eat is not hungry and can be said to have a poor appetite, not a good one. Very true, he said. Whereas he who has a taste for every sort of knowledge and who is curious to learn and is never satisfied, may be justly termed a philosopher? Am I not, right? Glaucon said, if curiosity makes a philosopher, you will find many a strange being will have a title to the name. All the lovers of sights have a delight in learning and must therefore be included. Musical enthusiasts, too, are a folk strangely out of place among philosophers, for they are the last persons in the world who would come to anything like a philosophical discussion, if they could help, while they run about at the Dionysiac festivals as if they had let out their ears to hear every chorus, whether the performance is in town or country, that makes no difference, they are there. Now are we to maintain that all these and any who have similar tastes, as well as the professors of quite minor arts, are philosophers? Certainly not, I replied, they are only an imitation. He said, who then are the true philosophers? Those, I said, who are lovers of the vision of truth. That is also good, he said, but I should like to know what you mean. To another, I replied, I might have a difficulty in explaining, but I am sure that you will admit a proposition which I am about to make. What is the proposition? That since beauty is the opposite of ugliness, there are two. Certainly. And since there are two, each of them is one? True again. And of just and unjust, good and evil, and of every other class, the same remark holds, taken singly, each of them is one, but from the various combinations of them with actions and things, and with one another, they are seen in all sorts of lights and appear many? Very true. And this is the distinction which I draw between the sight-loving, art-loving, practical class and those of whom I am speaking, and who are alone worthy of the name of philosophers. How do you distinguish them? He said. The lovers of sounds and sights, I replied, are, as I conceive, fond of fine tones and colors and forms and all the artificial products that are made from them, but their mind is incapable of seeing or loving absolute beauty. True, he replied. Few are they who can attain the sight of this. Very true. And he who, having a sense of beautiful things, has no sense of absolute beauty, or who, if another lead him to a knowledge of that beauty, is unable to follow, of such a one I ask, is he awake or in a dream only? Reflect, is not the dreamer, sleeping or waking, one who likens dissimilar things, who puts the copy in the place of the real object? I should certainly say that such an one was dreaming. But take the case of the other, who recognizes the existence of absolute beauty and can distinguish the idea from the objects which participate in the idea, neither putting the objects in the place of the idea nor the idea in the place of the objects. Is he a dreamer, or is he awake? He is wide awake. And may we not say that the mind of the one who knows has knowledge, and that the mind of the other, who opines only, has opinion? Certainly. But suppose that the latter should quarrel with us and dispute our statement, can we administer any soothing cordial or advice to him, without revealing to him that there is sad disorder in his wits? We must certainly offer him some good advice, he replied. Come, then, and let us think of something to say to him. Shall we begin by assuring him that he is welcome to any knowledge which he may have, and that we are rejoiced at his having it? But we should like to ask him a question. Does he who has knowledge know something or nothing? You must answer for him. I answer that he knows something. Something that is or is not. Something that is, for how can that which is not ever be known? And are we assured, after looking at the matter from many points of view, that absolute being is or may be absolutely known, but that the utterly non-existent is utterly unknown? Nothing can be more certain. Good. But if there be anything which is of such a nature as to be and not to be, that will have a place intermediate between pure being and the absolute negation of being? Yes, between them. And, as knowledge corresponded to being and ignorance of necessity to not being, for that intermediate between being and not being there must be discovered a corresponding intermediate between ignorance and knowledge, if there be such? Certainly. Do we acknowledge the existence of belief? Undoubtedly. As being the same with knowledge or another ability? Another ability. Then belief and knowledge have to do with different kinds of subject matter corresponding to this difference of abilities? Yes. And knowledge is relative to existence and knows existence. But before I continue further, I will make a division. What division? I will begin by categorizing abilities separately. They are powers in us, and in all other things, by which we do as we do. Vision and hearing, for example, I should call abilities. Have I clearly explained the category which I mean? Yes, I completely understand. Then let me tell you my perspective about them. I do not see them, and therefore the distinctions of shape, color, and the like, which enable me to discern the differences of some things, do not apply to them. When speaking of an ability, I only think of its scope and its outcome, and that which has the same scope and the same outcome I call the same ability, but that which has another scope and another outcome I call different. Would that be your way of speaking? Yes. And will you be so very kind as to answer one more question? Would you say that knowledge is an ability, or in what category would you place it? Certainly, knowledge is an ability, and the most powerful of all abilities. And is belief also an ability? Certainly, he said, for belief is that with which we can form a belief. And yet you were acknowledging a little while ago that knowledge is not the same as belief? Why, yes, he said, how can any reasonable being ever identify that which is infallible with that which errs? An excellent answer, proving, I said, that we are quite conscious of a distinction between them. Yes. Then knowledge and belief, having distinct abilities, have also distinct scopes or subject matters? That is certain. Existence is the scope or subject matter of knowledge, and knowledge is to know the nature of existence. Yes. And belief is to have a belief? Yes. And do we know what we believe? Or is the subject matter of belief the same as the subject matter of knowledge? Nay, he replied, that has been already disproven, if difference in ability implies difference in the scope or subject matter, and if, as we were saying, belief and knowledge are distinct abilities, then the scope of knowledge and of belief cannot be the same. Then if existence is the subject matter of knowledge, something else must be the subject matter of belief? Yes, something else. Well then, is non-existence the subject matter of belief? Or, rather, how can there be a belief at all about non-existence? Reflect, when a person has a belief, do they not have a belief about something? Can they have a belief which is a belief about nothing? Impossible. He who has a belief about some one thing? Yes. And non-existence is not one thing but, properly speaking, nothing? True. Of non-existence, ignorance was assumed to be the necessary opposite of existence, knowledge? True, he said. Then belief is not concerned either with existence or with non-existence. Not with either. And can therefore neither be ignorance nor knowledge? That seems to be true. But is belief to be sought without and beyond either of them, in a greater clarity than knowledge, or in a greater darkness than ignorance? In neither. Then I suppose that belief appears to you to be darker than knowledge, but lighter than ignorance? Both, and in no small degree. And to be within and between them? Yes. Then you would conclude that belief is intermediate? No question. But were we not saying before, that if anything appeared to be of a sort which is and is not at the same time, that sort of thing would appear also to lie in the interval between pure existence and absolute non-existence, and that the corresponding ability is neither knowledge nor ignorance, but will be found in the interval between them? True. And in that interval, has now been discovered something which we call belief? There has. Then what remains to be discovered is the object which partakes equally of the nature of existence and non-existence, and cannot rightly be termed either, pure and simple. This unknown term, when discovered, we may truly call the subject of belief, and assign each to their proper ability, the extremes to the abilities of the extremes and the mean to the ability of the mean. True. This being premised, I would ask the gentleman who believes that there is no absolute or unchangeable idea of beauty, in whose belief the beautiful is the manifold, he, I say, your lover of beautiful sights, who cannot bear to be told that the beautiful is one, and the just is one, or that anything is one, to him I would appeal, saying, will you be so very kind, sir, as to tell us whether, of all these beautiful things, there is one which will not be found ugly, or of the just, which will not be found unjust, or of the holy, which will not also be unholy? No, he replied, the beautiful will in some point of view be found ugly, and the same is true of the rest. And may not the many which are doubles be also halves, doubles, that is, of one thing, and halves of another? Quite true. And things great and small, heavy, and light, as they are termed, will not be denoted by these any more than by the opposite names? True, both these and the opposite names will always attach to all of them. And can any one of those many things which are called by names be said to be this rather than not to be this? He replied, they are like the punning riddles which are asked at feasts, or the children's puzzle about the eunuch aiming at the bat, with what he hit him, as they say in the puzzle, and upon what the bat was sitting. The individual objects of which I am speaking are also a puzzle and have a dual meaning, nor can you fix them in your mind either as existing or not existing, or both, or neither. Then what will you do with them? I spoke. Can they have a better place than between existing and not existing? For they are clearly not in greater darkness or negation than not existing, or more full of light and existence than existing. That is quite true, he said. Thus, we have discovered that the multitude's ideas about beauty and other things exist in a realm between pure existence and pure non-existence. This realm can be described as a matter of opinion rather than knowledge. Those who see many beautiful things, but do not see absolute beauty, or those who see many just things but not absolute justice, can be said to have opinion but not knowledge. On the other hand, those who see the absolute and unchanging things can be said to have knowledge. The former group loves and embraces the subjects of opinion, while the latter group loves and embraces the subjects of knowledge. Therefore, it is appropriate to call the former group lovers of opinion and the latter group lovers of wisdom. Summary of Chapter 5. In Chapter 5 of the dialogue continues with Socrates and his companions, focusing on the education and upbringing of the philosopher-kings, the highest rulers of the ideal city. One of the central themes of this chapter is the role of women in the city and their potential for intellectual and political participation. Socrates challenges traditional gender roles by suggesting that women should receive the same education as men and be eligible for the same roles, including that of the philosopher-king. This revolutionary idea challenges the prevailing gender norms of ancient Greece and anticipates later discussions on gender equality. The discussion also delves into the topic of philosopher-kings and their unique qualities. Socrates argues that true philosophers are rare but essential for the proper governance of the city. These philosopher-kings possess a deep understanding of the forms, the eternal and unchanging ideals that underlie reality. They can make just and wise decisions for the benefit of the city because they have knowledge of the highest truth. Socrates outlines the educational curriculum for these philosopher-kings, emphasizing the study of mathematics and dialectics to develop their intellectual capacities. He also explains the importance of exposing them to the good, the highest form, to guide their pursuit of wisdom and justice. Furthermore, the chapter explores the idea of the philosopher's ascent from the material world to the world of forms through intellectual inquiry. This journey represents the philosopher's transformation and enlightenment, which culminate in their ability to lead the city with wisdom and justice. In summary, Chapter 5 continues to examine the nature of the ideal city and its rulers. It introduces the concept of gender equality in education and governance, emphasizing the role of philosopher-kings in shaping a just society. This chapter underscores the importance of intellectual development and the pursuit of truth as essential qualities for those who lead and govern.